Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Sheviis, chapter 5, Halacha 1. This is part 2 of the shiur. Today we're really going to be covering the 15th of Shvat and how to calculate this stuff. Now, the Mishnah, we were talking about two different dates. We were talking about Rosh Hashanah. That's going to be the new year. And then you have the new year for the trees. That's Tu B'Shvat. Now, we found something out very interesting, that if you have a single crop tree, then it's going to be tithed according to the past year. And if you have a multiple crop tree, it's going to be tithed in the coming year. And what is going to be the date of the coming year? That's going to be the 15th of Shvat. So if you had a single harvest tree, that would be before in terms of tithing. This is going to be important for figuring out Meiser Sheni, Meiser Ani, whether something has Shvius sanctity or not. And also it's going to be important for figuring out your tithes. So it's also going to factor in for oral law, by the way. So we were talking about carob trees, and carob trees are special because they will start to form the fruit before Rosh Hashanah. Now, that's not normal. Most of the trees are going to form the fruit sometime after Rosh Hashanah. And the Gemara wants to understand why the carob tree, which is so different in all the halacha, what does it mean that it's going to be forming the chains, and what's going to happen if you're going to calculate it based on when it emerges. Now, fruit is going to be based upon when does it emerge, when does it start to come where the petals are there and it starts to emerge out of the tree. But carob trees are not. Carob trees are based on when the chains come. So what's the difference? And the Gemara is going to ask this question. It's going to say, did Rabbi Yudah not hear that which Rabbi Hanina bar Papa said? In regard to carob trees, their forming of chains is considered their forming of fruit. So we saw this in the previous chapter, and here's what the Rosh Hashanah says about this. This, by the way, is in the last chapter, but it's basically the idea is that carobs are going to be very bitter tasting when they first emerge, and they're only going to be edible later. And according to that point, the carobs which emerge even before Rosh Hashanah are not considered halachically significant. And the point where they give the appearance of having formed chains is what's important, because that's the equivalent of the emergence of the fruit in other species. So the Rosh Hashanah continues and says, since carobs form chains only after Rosh Hashanah, it is understandable that they are tithed according to the coming year, even according to the explanation of the rabbis in Bavel. Now, Rabbi Yasa was talking about this before in the first part of the shiur, and they were saying that in Bavel, it's Rabbi Nehemiah. There in Bavel, they say that Rabbi Nehemiah meant as follows, that a single harvest tree that formed fruit before Rosh Hashanah of the world, that's Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, is tithed according to the past year. And after Rosh Hashanah of the world, it's tithed according to the coming year. But again, this is going to be odd because of the carob. Now, over there, Rabbi Nehemiah is holding that single harvest trees are assigned to the year in which the fruit attains a third of the growth. That's one idea from the Mara Fulda. And Rabbi Yasa says in this interpretation of Rabbi Nehemiah's ruling that Rabbi Yasa said Rabbi Nehemiah meant as follows, that if a single harvest tree brought forth a third of its growth before Rosh Hashanah of the world, it is tithed according to the past year. And after Rosh Hashanah of the world, it is tithed according to the coming year. So Rabbi Yasa is agreeing with the rabbis of Bavel that Rabbi Nehemiah is holding that the new year for single harvest trees is going to be Rosh Hashanah. That's going to be the first of Tishrei. So again, there's two things going on. There are the multiple harvest trees and single harvest trees. What's an example of a single harvest tree? That's going to be an olive tree. That could be a grapevine. Grapevines are single harvest. You also have with carob trees are single harvest. And what are multiple harvest trees? Well, if you look at peach trees are multiple harvest, and nectarine trees are multiple harvest, and also fig trees are multiple harvest trees. So the question here is talking about when is the tithing going to be for a single harvest tree, not a multiple harvest tree that the fruit will be emerging over many points. So this interpretation that Rabbi Yasa gives is going to be challenged, and Rabbi Zera challenged it in the presence of Rabbi Yasa, and he said, but there are times that the years are delayed in maturing their fruits, and dates begin to swell only after Rosh Hashanah of the world. So the idea is going to be, something that's going to be a question about what happens with the difference in weather. And Rabbi Zera continues, says, yet the custom is that even in such years, dates are tithed according to the past year. So the custom is going to be that, as the rabbis of Bavel are holding, Rabbi Nehemiah is holding that the new year for single harvest trees is Rosh Hashanah, and he agrees that the critical stage is when the fruit emerges. By the way, the date that the fruit emerges, that's called Hanata, okay, and Hanata. But if you have a difference in weather, then some of the fruit and the maturation date can come before Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so sometimes that can happen. And Rabbi Nehemiah is holding that the critical stage for single harvest trees is the beginning fourth of a third, and agrees that the New Year is Tu B'Shvat, because even in years of delayed fruit maturation, dates will attain a third of the growth before Tu B'Shvat. Now, what Rabbi Zera is doing, Rabbi Zera is saying that in years in which the development of the fruit is different than the other years, and dates are not going to attain a third of the growth until after Rosh Hashanah, it's going to follow that in normal years, dates will attain a third of their growth before Rosh Hashanah. So how are we to understand what Rabbi Nehemiah is talking about? And what is that brisa? Let me say it again. The brisa says that Rabbi Nehemiah says, regarding a type of tree that yields one harvest per year, such as an olive tree, date palms, and carob, even though they form their fruits before the 15th of Shvat, they are tithed according to the future year. And the question is going to be where, on Tu B'Shvat to Rosh Hashanah, is it going to be there? Or is it going to be where it's going to be like, since a third of the growth can occur before Rosh Hashanah and before Tu B'Shvat? So the question is going to be, which time period are you going to be looking at? Are you going to be looking at the time between Tu B'Shvat and Rosh Hashanah? Or are you going to be looking at the time between Rosh Hashanah and Tu B'Shvat, where you have a type of tree that, perhaps because of weather conditions, might ripen before Rosh Hashanah, whereas normally it would ripen after Rosh Hashanah for a single harvest tree. It might be ripening to a third ready before. And so then what's happening is you've pulled it back to this time frame between Tu B'Shvat and Rosh Hashanah. It's no longer the time frame that exists from Rosh Hashanah to Tu B'Shvat. And it could mean that, for these types of trees that, for single harvest trees, it could be that, some of these trees could be tithed according to a future year. So in other words, it could, the question is, are you going to tithe it according to the past year or the future year? So Rabbi Zera is going to continue. He's going to say, not from his own mind, speaking of Rabbi Nehemiah's ruling, did Rabbi Yassa say this thing. In other words, Rabbi Yassa, of talking of Rabbi Nehemiah's ruling in Baraisa, is talking about Rabbi Nehemiah's holding that the critical stage for the single harvest tree is a bringing forth of a third of the growth. And again, is that going to be, one of two time frames? Is that going to be from Rosh Hashanah to Tu B'Shvat, or is it going to be from Tu B'Shvat to Rosh Hashanah? And, what also is going to happen in, weird weather years. And that's also going to be a question, because which year are you going to tithe something like dates? So the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, rather, he deduced it from the exchange of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. And this, by the way, is talking about where, Rabbi Yochanan accepted the challenge made by Rish Lakish. And they were talking about Rabbi Nehemiah and what does he mean? And the question is going to be, does Rabbi Nehemiah mean that the critical stage for these single harvest dates is going to be when they attain a third of the growth? And so the question would be that, what about when, the fruit emerges? So Rabbi Yassa is basically holding that, on these kinds of things, that the new year for trees is not Tu B'Shvat, but it's really Rosh Hashanah. So that's going to be, big question. What about Tu B'Shvat? So what this is arguing is that Rabbi Nehemiah said in the Baraisa regarding single harvest trees, this is all about single harvest trees, that even if the Hanata, which is going to be where the fruit emerges, occurs before Tu B'Shvat, they're going to be tithed according to the future year. And there's two explanations for why this could be. Okay, either Rabbi Nehemiah is saying that the critical stage for the single harvest tree is not going to be Hanata, as the rabbis are saying, but it's really going to be a third of the growth. Or it could mean that Rabbi Nehemiah is holding that the new year for single harvest trees is really Rosh Hashanah. It's not Tu B'Shvat. The rabbis are saying that the new year for trees is Tu B'Shvat, and it looks like Rabbi Nehemiah is saying, no, for single harvest trees, it's really Rosh Hashanah. So that's part of the argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish trying to understand it. And, the question is that, which is it? Now, Rabbi Zera is going to come and challenge and say about the custom of the people and say that, on late maturing dates or these years of different weather changes, that there's a custom that people follow and that they've effectively followed the practice of Rabbi Nehemiah only on carob trees. And that, by the way, is what Rabbi Yochanan was saying before in the first shiur. So the idea is that, Rabbi Yochanan is mentioning carob trees, and it could be that it might be that Rabbi Yochanan is really saying for all kinds of single harvest trees, and Rabbi Nehemiah has been talking about single harvest trees all along. So the question is going to be that was Rabbi Yochanan talking about carob trees only, or is it going to be like what Rabbi Nehemiah was saying, where it's all single harvest trees, and Rabbi Yochanan was really just being quiet in his presence? Now, it looks like that Rabbi Yochanan in the last shiur accepts Rish Lakish's challenge, and that he accepts it as a legitimate argument. Or it could look like the argument was so flawed that he just didn't even bother to respond. So We're going to continue with trying to understand what's going on with Rabbi Nehemiah's ruling, because this is really important, and it talks about, what is really the meaning of Tu B'Shvat. Is it possible that the reading of Rabbi Nehemiah in this Baraisa is going to be that single harvest trees really have a different new year for trees than multiple harvest trees? So another Amora is going to talk about it, and Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha says in the name of Shmuel Bar Abba, if a single harvest tree brings forth a third of its growth before the 15th of Shvat, that's Tu B'Shvat, it is tithed according to the past year. And after the 15th of Shvat, it is tithed according to the coming year. So this, by the way, is the identical explanation with what Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Rish Lakish were both saying about Rabbi Nehemiah's ruling. So the Gemara is going to explain and support Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha. And Rabbi Zera says, and Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha's explanation that Rabbi Nehemiah means that the critical stage for the single harvest trees is going to be when their fruits grow a third, but the new year is going to be the 15th of Shvat, and that's going to seem more correct, says this Gemara, than the explanation of the rabbis in Bavel, who are saying that Rabbi Nehemiah means the opposite, that the critical stage for single harvest trees is when the fruit emerges, but the new year is going to be Rosh Hashanah. In other words, the rabbis in Bavel are saying, no, the single harvest trees have a different new year for trees. It's going to be Rosh Hashanah. And not only that, the important thing to determine for single harvest trees is when the fruits emerge. And the rabbis in Eretz Yisrael, like what Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish are both agreeing on, is going to be saying that no, the new year of trees is going to be the 15th of Shvat, regardless of whether it's a single harvest tree or not. But the main point that Rabbi Nehemiah is saying, and the main thing that we have to look at on a single harvest tree, is when the fruit grows a third. And it's not necessarily going to be when the fruits emerge. So this is coming to ask these questions. What about the emergence of fruit? What about for fruit when it reaches a third on these single harvest trees? Now, keep in mind, we know that for determining grain, it's when the grain ripens a third. So on these single harvest trees, is it also going to be like that? Not when it emerges like a normal tree, like a fig tree, but is it going to be like when it's going to be, it's going to look a lot more like grain in some way. The Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, regarding an etrog tree, you will find that the sages uprooted the usual law applicable to trees when it is in the critical stage of the emergence of fruit and assigned it a different critical stage. So the idea is that in Beurim, in 2:6, Rabban Gamliel is saying, and by the way, the Halacha follows him on this, that unlike most other trees where the critical stage for Meiser is when the fruit emerges, that's going to be the Hanata, the idea for the etrog is going to be different. The etrog, the critical stage, is going to be when the fruit is picked. And so you can see that the sages uprooted the usual critical stage of trees regarding the etrog tree. So you have a lot of different things going on here. You have a different time for calculating for carobs, because the carobs will emerge before Rosh Hashanah. So they're saying no, that's when it hangs down in chains. Then you're saying that, on normal trees, that, the New Year is going to be Tu B'Shvat, but the single harvest trees could be Rosh Hashanah. And that's also an argument. And the rabbis in Eretz Yisrael, like Rabbi Yochanan, are saying, no, it's still the 15th of Shvat, but the critical stage is not going to be when the fruit emerges like the other trees. It's going to be when it reaches a third. So this ends up changing the calculation of which year it's going to end up in. That's the point. The point is by making the adjustment, like what the rabbis in Eretz Yisrael are saying, that when the fruit reaches a third of their growth, and you're calculating it by the 15th of Shvat, not by Rosh Hashanah, it's going to change the year of tithing. So the Gemara is going to continue, and it's gonna say like this. It's going to say, yet you find they still did not uproot the starting date of the etrog tree's year, and they kept it at the 15th of Shvat, just like for all the other trees. So what they're doing is they're going back to this other tree that has a difference from all the other trees, and they're asking, when is the new year for this tree? Because this tree is going to be based on when it's picked. It's not going to be calculated by the year when it emerges. So the question is, this is going to be a different tool for measuring, when is going to be the starting date of the etrog tree's year. And this, by the way, is going to be the 15th of Shvat. So the question is going to come up, and I'm going to sum this up in a minute, but the question is going to come up, and it's going to, here's the question. The question is that here then, in the case of the single harvest tree, which the Gemara is saying, where the rabbis in Bavel are holding, according to Rabbi Nehemiah, that the sages uprooted the usual law regarding trees, which is that the beginning of its year is the 15th of Shvat, and you will say that they did not uproot the usual law applicable to a tree, which is the critical stage of the emergence of the fruit. So let's sum this up, and let's look at the Marafula for some help on this. Rabbi Zera is arguing that if we find two trees, and the two kinds of trees deviated from the normal rules following most trees, then basically it would be illogical to say that the sages treated one of them in a opposite manner to the other, okay? In an opposite manner. They just didn't, it's going to be odd, really strange to make and say that the sages said to treat it exactly opposite. So for the etrog tree, the sages changed the critical stage, but they left alone the new year. So the question is going to be, were the rabbis, is it really going to be the halacha that for single harvest trees, the new year is not going to be Tu B'Shvat, it's going to be Rosh Hashanah? And what they're saying over here is that for such a big change for the etrog tree, which is going to count for the year based upon when it's picked, that's the critical part. The calculation is still going to be based on Tu B'Shvat. They're not going to count it from Rosh Hashanah. That's the point. So even with the etrog tree that the sages did change the critical stage, they left alone the new year. They left it alone at Tu B'Shvat. And the rabbis of Bavel are holding that they actually also changed they've changed the new year. And it's going to be that, again, this is for single harvest trees. This is not for multiple harvest trees. So there's a few points on what's going on. We're trying to figure out Rabbi Nehemiah's ruling from this Baraisa. Everyone in Bavel and Eretz Yisrael is trying to figure out what is Rabbi Nehemiah saying about this for the calculation. And the first one's going to go like this. Rabbi Yochanan, Rish Lakish, and Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha, in the name of Shmuel Bar Abba, here's what they're saying about Rabbi Nehemiah. They're saying that Rabbi Nehemiah meant to change the critical stage for these single harvest trees from Hanata, which is going to be the stage that they emerge, and it's going to change it to where it gets a third of the growth. But they're going to leave the new year at Tu B'Shvat like all the other trees. Okay? They're not changing that. And according to this opinion, we would say that regarding this Mishnah on the white figs, the banos shuach, it's not going to be according to Rabbi Nehemiah, and that the public's custom of following Rabbi Nehemiah, which Rabbi Yochanan mentions, is only talking about carob trees, not anything else. So that's one understanding of what's going on with all of this, okay? The rabbis of Bavel are reading Rabbi Nehemiah totally differently. And they're saying that Rabbi Nehemiah changed for single harvest trees the new year from Tu B'Shvat to Rosh Hashanah. And basically, they left it alone for the critical stage, and they left the critical stage alone like every other tree. Every other tree, it's going to be when the fruit emerges. That's going to be the Hanata. And they're saying for the single harvest trees, it's also going to be when the tree emerges and when the fruit emerges. And basically, the only thing that changes on it is going to be the calculation of the year, because they're saying the year is really going to be Rosh Hashanah. Again, this is all going to determine which year it's going to be tithed. Now, what's odd about this is going to be that if you're following the rabbis of Bavel, then on a single harvest tree, like the etrog, it's going to be done exactly opposite for the other single harvest trees. So on the single harvest tree of the etrog, the new year of the tree, even in Bavel, is still going to be Tu B'Av, Tu B'Shvat. So that's what's so odd about the ruling of the rabbis in Bavel, okay, that you have this oddity of the etrog tree, okay, and the oddity of the etrog tree, it's going to be calculated. The critical point is when you pick it. It's not when it emerges. It's not a third ready. It's when you actually pick it. Now the question is, what is the new year on calculating it for tithes? And it's going to be based on Tu B'Shvat for the new year. Now that is totally different from the other single harvest trees, like with the olive tree, because they're saying over in Bavel that no, the new year is going to be on Rosh Hashanah. So the etrog tree ends up being an oddity. Now, there's a third argument about what's going on with Rabbi Nehemiah and this brisa and this other interpretation of what is Rabbi Nehemiah trying to say. Here goes the third explanation. Rabbi Yassa is saying that Rabbi Nehemiah is trying to change the single harvest trees at both the critical stage, that's going to be a change from when it emerges, that's going to be the Hanata, to where it comes to a third. And not only that, Rabbi Yassa is saying that they're also changing the new year from Tu B'Shvat to Rosh Hashanah. And when you look at this opinion by Rabbi Yassa, and if you're going to look at the Mishnah's ruling regarding these white figs, the Banos Shuach, and you also look at the custom that Rabbi Zera brought up of the tithing these late maturing dates, or these dates that come and start to, emerge at an earlier time because of weather patterns, and you're going to be tithing it according to the previous year, that's going to be where the custom of these people who are going to be tithing these dates are not following the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah. So it would be that the custom is actually going to be wrong, effectively. And so according to Rabbi Yassa's point, Rabbi Yassa is holding that not only did the critical stage on single harvest trees change to being a third, according to Rabbi Nehemiah, but also the new year calculation changed from Tu B'Shvat to Rosh Hashanah, and not only that, the custom that these people are doing on the dates is also wrong. Okay? That's going to be the 3 points. Now, we're going to continue, and Rabbi Zera is saying that he's siding with the opinion that the critical stage for a single harvest tree is going to be when the fruits attain a third of their growth. And another Amara is going to argue against it, and Rabbi Bun Barchia objects before Rabbi Zera and says, if so, the first third of the fruit should be tithed according to the past year, and the second and third should be tithed according to the coming year. So what this challenge is trying to ask is it's trying to say that if the fruit is tithed according to when it's initially formed, that's understandable because by Tu B'Shvat, most of the year's rains have already fallen in Eretz Yisrael, and the rains that fall in the first half of the season are going to be what's going to cause the sap to go up the tree and generate fruit. So if you're looking at the Hanata, and that's going to occur at this time, then even if there's no more rain that's going to fall in the year after Tu B'Shvat, the fruit would still develop. So basically what Rabbi Bun Barchia is objecting to with what Rabbi Zera is saying is that he's saying that it makes sense to say that the fruit emerges and it's going to be assigned according to when it emerges, and it's going to be, the calculation should be either before or after Tu B'Shvat. And basically he's asking Rabbi Zera, what is the point of what you're saying by trying to assign the fruit to the year based upon when it's going to grow a third? In other words, says Rabbi Kanievsky about this, he's going to say, if the fruit did not grow a third by Tu B'Shvat, it's understandable that the entire fruit should be assigned to the coming year because it is not considered a fruit until it grows a third. And since it is not yet edible at that point, but if it did grow a third before Tu B'Shvat, then they granted the first third, it should be assigned to the past year. So the question Rabbi Kanievsky is saying that he's asking, Rabbi Bun Barchi is asking, is that why should the last 2/3 be assigned to the past year? In other words, the idea is why is Rabbi Bun directing this question at Rabbi Zera, who Rabbi Zera is saying that Rabbi Nehemiah is holding that single harvest trees are going to be tithed according when the fruit grew a third by Tu B'Shvat. So that's going to be another question is like, well, why isn't Rabbi Bun asking a question about things like grains, which, by the way, everybody agrees for grain it's a third. So why is this going to be different? Rabbi Zera is going to answer Rabbi Bun. He says the first third of the fruit is the most difficult in coming, and once it comes, the rest is going to grow quickly. And again, this is going to be dependent upon how the rains are going to be. In other words, that if the rains have already come and it starts to emerge, then the rest of it's going to emerge easily because the rains have already come. And there's another Amara who's impressed by Rabbi Zera's understanding of how things grow, and Rabbi Ba says, like an expert sharecropper, did Rabbi Zera teach this answer. And basically, a sharecropper is an expert in the growth patterns of fruit because that's his job, to work in vineyards or fields. And basically what he's saying is that Rabbi Zera must have learned this information from expert sharecroppers, or he wouldn't know this for the timing. Okay? And that's another thing about the Gedolim. The Gedolim of the time are always finding out what's going on in the science. They're not just making rulings that are disconnected from reality. And so there's going to be another Amra who's going to support Rabbi Zera's answer. And Shmuel says that you can understand Rabbi Zera's assertion from the development of the leaves, of the tree's leaves. And the Gemara says within the first 60 days, leaves emerge. And then in the later 6 days, sorry, let me read that again. It says, within the first 60 days, 6 leaves emerge, and in the ensuing 6 days, 60 leaves emerge. So in the first 60 days, you get 6 leaves, and in the last 6 days, all of a sudden, 60 leaves will come about. And this is basically saying that, it's showing that the sap that's going to come early in the tree's development is going to nourish it. And once the tree begins producing leaves, then the remaining time is gonna be where the time is very short because the sap has come all the way to the top of the tree, and now what took 60 days and only 1/10 of the production happened in a tenth of that time. 600% can happen, right? So that's really what it's saying, because again, it has to do with the sap reaching the top of the tree. And the Gemara is going to come up with more support that the first growth is going to go very slowly, and then the rest is going to go very quickly. And it was taught in a Baraisa. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, from the emergence of the leaves until the Pagin, that's the point of Chanata, is going to be 50 days. And from the Pagin until the Shisin, Hanavelos, that's going to be the stage where the figs are going to be 1/3 mature, and that's going to be another 50 days. And from the Shisin Hanavelos until the figs are fully grown, it's going to be another 50 days. And Rebbe says all the intervals are 40 days each. Now, this is something that's really amazing. We know that one of the opinions for the tree of knowledge is going to be the fig tree. And Rebbe is holding that the intervals are going to be from when it first starts to emerge until it starts getting ready, and then the final point where it's ready is going to be 40 days each. And if you look at the amount of time when the ninth and the 10th plague happened, and the time when the Jews reached the Har Sinai is going to be 120 days. And it was 40, 40, and 40. And so that's going to be very symbolic there in connecting the two. And it's very agadic, not accidental. Anyway, the Gemara is now going to talk about some practical advice based on all of this. And the Gemara is going to say like this, okay? The Gemara says, if one picked a just ripened fig. Now, this is going to be a multiple harvest tree, okay? Not a single harvest tree. A fig is a multiple harvest tree. And he doesn't know when it emerged. In other words, he doesn't know if it came before the 15th of Shvat or after the 15th Shvat. And he doesn't know which year to assign it to. And don't forget, you can't assign a fruit from this year for that year, okay? Everything has to be in the same year for assigning tithes. Rabbi Yonah says about this, he should count back in time 100 days. And if the 15th of Shvat falls within that 100 days, he knows that's when it emerged. And he knows that it either came before the 15th of Shvat or after. And then he'll know whether to tithe it in the last year or the next year. So the Mishnah now is going to talk about this question on parseos. This is going to be something in these dates, these Persian dates that are mentioned in the Mishnah. And we talk about Rabbi Yudah's ruling in the Mishnah that the Sheviis is going to be the first year following the Shemitah. And the rabbis are basically arguing in this Mishnah, that the only fruit where the Sheviis rules apply after Shemitah is going to be on these white figs, the Benos Shuach. So here's going to be extra dialogue between the rabbis and Rabbi Yudah on this. And the rabbis said to Rabbi Yudah, why have parseos grown with you in Tiberias? And they produce fruit over 1 year. And he said to them, why you have parseos growing with you in Tziporim? And they produce fruit over 2 years. So Rabbi Yudah is holding his opinion based upon the parseos that are growing in his area, and the rabbis are holding their opinion on the parseos growing in their area. So it could be that there are two kinds of parseos, because where historical Sipporin is and where is Tiberias, it's only about a 20-minute, 15-minute car ride. It's not so far. So this dispute is talking about a case where somebody doesn't know, which of these two kinds of, parseos we're dealing with. And the problem comes if somebody bought it from a non-Jew, or a Jew who is a Sheviis merchant, could be a Sheviis merchant. What are you going to do? And the halacha would be that he should follow the majority of the parseos. And Rabbi Yudah is holding that the majority is going to be like those that grow in his area, and they mature in 2 years. And the rabbis are holding that the majority is going to be like theirs, and it's going to be that mature in 1 year. And then that's it. And the Gemara ends. And tomorrow we're going to be dealing with Halacha 2, which is going to be talking about loof, which is going to be very complicated for Sheviis. Anyway, have a great day.